There should have been an email this morning. I don't have a picture, but it had the list. Should have had the listing. Good morning. Believe will start in a moment. Okay, Boker Tov. Good morning. Ken, I don't see you all have your video off, which that's okay if you want it that way. You're certainly willing. Uh, I'm willing certainly to see your faces if you'd like that to be. But I would like to know whether or not you have a chumash convenient, because it could influence a little bit of how we proceed. So can you just either let me know visually with a thumbs up or a shaking of the head, or to unmute yourself at least for a moment and let me know if you have a chumash?
I'm getting it from.
All right, great. I don't want to, bias your decision making, but with the chumash, it's easier for me to put you more to work. So that's better that way. Okay, so we're going to study parts of chapter 24, Perek Chaf Dalid, which is the second Perek chapter in this week's Parsha. The first Perek dealt with the death and the burial of Sarah, the acquisition of Marat HaMachpelah as a burial plot. And this second Perek opens up the Avraham Zakein Bai Bayamim V'Hashem Berachet Avraham Bakol. If you happen to have the Art Scroll Chumash, chapter 24 starts at the bottom of the page 108. So that the translation of that pasuk is: Avraham was old, advanced in years. The word literally means days. You could say days, and especially in the plural, when we say yamim, often means shanim, years. So Avraham was old, advanced in his years, and God blessed Avraham with everything. I'd like to invite you to compose a list of questions that you might have on this pasuk. Just in case you don't have the pasuk right in front of you, it is pasuk 1 in chapter 24, but I'm going to say it again. And I will confess that in English, at least the way I'm going to give you the English now, one of the potential questions will not be evident. But here's the pasuk in Hebrew and English. Avraham Zakein Ba Bayamim. Avraham was old and advanced. Hashem berach et hambakol. Hashem blessed Abraham with everything. Any questions?
Did he bless him with immortality? Everything?
Well, okay. Hold that question. We'll try to answer that. Okay. I mean, you have to define immortality. So if you mean being physically alive, well, we know Abraham's not physically alive, but if immortality means that somehow you live on in the hearts of others, or your impact lives in the world, then we probably really could say he has immortality, and that could be included in everything. But maybe I could rephrase your question and say, how could you even say everything? And is that
exactly? Am I cold? Yeah. It's like that hit right. Me like
okay.
Straight
so
away.
Good. All right. Mm-hmm. So that's a valid question of why to say everything, and you can enhance that question by saying we're not a people generally of quantity. Do you really have to have everything, like to be satisfied in life?
No.
Any other questions?
I think Hani wants to say something too.
Okay.
Well, I said that we know that he was old, and the Torah never repeats anything. Why should they repeat it again?
Repeat what? Oh, that he was old.
That he was old.
Okay, that's also a great question. Well, although it's not repeated in the same way, it's still a good question. The Zakein part cited in the Torah, you're right, but the Baba Yamim isn't, and that would lead us to the second question or the third question. So Honey's first question, which is the second question of the morning, is why repeat the word Zakein? And the other question that would come about is, if you say Zakein, why do you also have to say Baba Yamim, that he's advanced in years? No. Is it the same thing or isn't it the same thing? There's one more question that it's a little bit harder to come to, but you can get it, whereas the fourth question is a pretty subtle one, but I think important. But one more shot for another question. I'll give you a hint. It could
I don't have the Hebrew in front of me, otherwise I would be able to look at it. Can you read it one more time?
I will read it one more time in Hebrew and English. I'll read the whole Hebrew, then the whole English. V'Avraham zakein baba yamim v'Hashem berach et Avraham bakol. And Abraham was old and advanced in years. And Hashem blessed Avraham with everything.
Well, it doesn't really say years; it says days.
Right, but we have other instances in Torah where the like with Abraham lived in Plishtim, Yamim Rabim, many days. Doesn't mean days; it means years.
Okay.
And even normally we want to bless somebody with a long life. We say you may be blessed with arichus yamim, with length of days. And in the Shema, in the second paragraph, right? L'man you in order to follow these mitzvahs, in order that your days is the literal translation. So we don't necessarily mean days. And the best proof for that is that when Rivka's family, right, so it's right from this week's Parsha and right from the Perek that we're studying, when the family all agrees that it's a great shidduch and it comes time for Rivka to leave, then the family wants Rivka to stay a little bit longer. And what do they say? Let her stay yamim o asor. Yamim, whatever that means. I mean, literally, if we were talking in modern Hebrew with one another, we would say days or 10. Let her stay days or 10. So what does that mean? It really only makes sense if you say a year, like if Yamim means a year. So let her stay for a year. If you can't give me a year, how about 10 months? So Yamim can definitely be years, can definitely be. With that all said, I will share with you.
The Rebbitzins got an idea.
Thank you. Hand. Thank you for being my co-host, Cheryl. Yes, but you're muted, Barbara. Yeah, you're still muted.
Yeah, I was having a problem hearing some of the other suggestions, so I don't know if it was suggested already. But does it mean that is one possibility that Abraham was old in days, but then Hashem blessed him with everything? Like, could it be like he had to wait till he was his whole life passed that he got everything, or was it that his days were filled with everything, like that was his whole life? Or do we get from this, why does it have to say Zakein if he could have just said that earlier that he had got it?
Great question, Belina. That we're going to cover that, and there's still room for at least one more question, if not two. See, the principle that many commentators hold by is that the Torah generally prefers to be parsimonious with its use of words. So if you can say something in a shorter way, that generally is the preference. Therefore, if you don't say it as short as it could be said, there's something significant about why the longer way was chosen. the longer way can be one word at times. It could be even repeating like a verb, Vayomer, he said, and then the next pasuk again to repeat, Vayomer. So using that as a hint, are you able to see any other question that pops up? And if you're checking your head, Barbara,
Maybe that's why the
mute
word
you,
then
though.
isn't necessary.
What's that?
Then isn't necessary. The
Then?
word then. Yeah. Read the sentence
Well,
again.
it doesn't really say. It says, "Avraham zaken baba yamim." Avraham was old, advanced in years. Vashem berachet Avraham bakol. God blessed Abraham with everything.
There's the repetition of Abraham's name.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Wendy.
Yeah. Very good, Wendy. So that's a very significant question, because the Torah could have just said that as Siftei Chachamim, one of the main commentaries on Rashi, and I'll share Rashi with you in a moment, but it could have just said Beiracho. It could have added one letter to the word that's already there, where it says Hashem Beirach, Hashem blessed Abraham. It could have said Hashem blessed him, and blessed him would be one word with one additional letter being added. So you would have saved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You would have saved 6 letters and two words. So that's another question. Why is Abraham's name need to be repeated when we could know who it was, especially by using a preposition or the possessive or object preposition to identify Abraham, and it's right in the same verse. It's not even like it's in a different verse. All right, so let's start to answer these questions, and in the course, B'li Neder, I'll share with you the 5th question, or 6th question now, wherever we're up to, which is the more, it's a very subtle one. Yes, Barbara, you have to unmute.
He can even hear me when I'm muted.
That's exactly why I muted you, because, right.
But not in real life.
I hear myself over your pad.
No, but it's also, I missed that first discussion. So Baba Yamin, why does it say Ba?
Yeah, well, that's part of the expression, and we mean he had come in years or advanced in years. So let's look at that, for a moment. The Malbim says that these are ages in older years. We had the difference between a zaken and the difference between like a seva. A seva is more advanced in years than a zaken. So the Malbim, says that the Torah is sensitizing us that Avraham is, progressing. He's not getting any younger, and he's progressing through life. He's coming to a stage where one could be more frail, and so he's more frail, or at least vulnerable, than he was in the previous stories. The Radak, Rav Kimchi, says that the term of Baba Yamim means that these are going to be his concluding days of his life, or his concluding years of his life. But even though that being said, and we won't hear so much more about Abraham after this, but even so, Abraham's going to live a lot of years still. Abraham was about 10 years older than Sarah. So Sarah died at 127, puts Abraham at approximately 137, which matches, if we hold the traditional view that Yitzchak was 37 at the time of the Akedah, of the binding at the designated place by Hashem for the Olah offering. So, that puts Abraham also, he gave birth at 100. He fathered Yitzchak, when Abraham was 100, welcomed him into this world. So when Abraham dies at 100, has 30 left of life, not a short span, even for Abraham. It's a big chunk of years, and maybe that's why the Ramban, Baruch Hashem, I saw the Ramban because it also confirms that I was feeling, is that the Torah is really telling us what Abraham felt. First of all, Abraham doesn't know how many years he's going to have left in this world. But so he's feeling that this could be like close to the end of his life. And if that be the case, there's an important chapter that has not yet been written. And that's Yitzchak taking the active role of continuing Abraham's mission in this world, building the Jewish people and spreading knowledge of God to as many as possible. So because Abraham takes stock. No more procrastination. It's time. It's time for a shidduch. Now we need to ask the question: is that since this chapter 24 is really a chapter about the shidduch in the being made between Rivka and Yitzchak, and it's a very long chapter because we have Eliezer's plan, we have Eliezer's discussion of what's going to be, we have the account of what actually did take place, and then we have the account that Eliezer gives to Rivka's family, which doesn't exactly match what the Torah said actually did take place. So there's but more than that, it's like very elaborate. It's a very, very long chapter. And but so if this chapter is about shidduchim, what's even the role of saying that Abraham was blessed with everything? Is this statement really fit in, at least the last part? The fact that Abraham is concerned about that his son's not yet married and he wants to try to do whatever he can while he still has life in him, that part makes sense. The material wealth might not make as much sense. And we're going to have at least two approaches to why this is really here. So Rashi says that if you take the gematria of Bakol, you're going to find that it equals 52. The bet is 2, the kaf is 20, the lamed is 30. So it's 52. You know what else has the numerical value of 52? It's the most condensed word possible. At least it's the most condensed form. In 2 letters, you could create a word that is 52 in gematria, numerical value. It has very much to do with our story. And that word starts with a bet. And which letter is worth 50? I feel like I'm hosting a game show here. A nun. I heard Barbara, even though she's muted. So Rashi brings down from the Medrash that what we're really talking here, we're using a code word. We're using a code word to really signify Yitzchak. Now, God blessed Abraham with everything, meaning the birth and life of Yitzchak. The Gur Aryeh, another famous commentary on Rashi, says that if we wouldn't say that it's really an allusion to Yitzchak, to the son, then why had that phrase here? Why tell us about Abraham's wealth? It wouldn't make sense. It really had. It's not just like a wild thought. It's like really sort of like it's the pshat. It makes no other sense but to say that we're talking about the blessing of Yitzchak. But if so, why not asked the Gur Aryeh himself, why not just say that Hashem blessed him with a son? So the Gur Aryeh answers that until Abraham had this son, he considered himself as having none of the blessings that were coming to him or that even were delivered to him. And Abraham himself, says the Gur Aryeh, made it clear to Hashem when Hashem makes a nice promise to Abraham, and Abraham says, "What can you give me, Hashem? I don't have children. That's what I really want." So this is what we're really being told here is that Abraham had a lot of things in the past, but he didn't per se focus on them, and they didn't have such great value to him until we really have the vehicle and a viable vehicle to invest this wealth in. And that being Yitzchak, and again, the mission of Abraham and Yitzchak as it comes to the world. And with that, I'll share with you the other subtle question in the Pasuk. I want to talk to you about a rule in the Torah, certainly according to many Meforshim, and certainly according to Rashi, even though he doesn't always mention it. And in Hebrew, one of the ways of referring to it is avar rachok, is that in general, unlike English, the Torah usually speaks with the verb first and then the subject. So in English, we usually say he spoke or he went. But let's say let's use a name, because it's a little bit trickier in the way I just said it, because in Hebrew you can roll the subject into the verb. But if you wanted to say that Moshe went, you would say Vayelech Moshe, as we have a Parsha. But in English, we translate that, as Moshe went. If you want to be exact in the translation and a little bit clumsy, we would say went Moshe, but that's not the way we talk, so we don't translate it. But in the Chumash, primarily, you have the verb first, like Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz mugurei aviv, dwelt Yaakov in the land of his father's sojournings. So that's the primary order that the Torah speaks in, and occasionally, I wouldn't say it's rare, but sometimes the order is reversed. When it's reversed and the subject is mentioned first, generally there's one of two possibilities, and that becomes tricky to figure out which one it is. But one possibility is that an emphasis is being placed on the subject, usually as a contrast to another player in the story. And the other possibility is with the famous example where Rashi introduces this rule, is when Adam and Eve were expelled from Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, at the end of chapter 3 in Bereshis. So chapter 4 begins, Adam yada et Chava ishto, that the man was intimate, literally translated as no, but was intimate with his wife, and they had children. And Rashi says there that because of the reversal in the grammar, where it says Adam yada, normally it should have said Vayeda ha'adam, the verb should have come first. So Rashi says that this episode being discussed here happened sometime before the last mentioned episode. I use the word avar rachok the two words in Hebrew, like the distant past, because it's not happening where it's written, it happened earlier in time. And therefore, says Rashi, that means that the marital relation Chava had, the pregnancy that Chava went through, and the birth of the children all happened in the Garden of Eden before Adam and Chava and their family were expelled from Gan Eden. It is a tremendous statement, and especially if you put it on the world scene and philosophical issues with certainly at least one other major religion, it's earth-shattering, literally. But the rule itself can open our eyes to dynamics in a story. Again, it's not every time that you see that. You have to analyze it. You have to see if it could be just a contrast. And Chama Leibowitz, who sensitized me to this rule many, many, many years ago, later as I had correspondence with her and I was trying to make a point for something, she says, you also have to give a reason why the Torah would say something out of order here. The Ramban would have a lot of difficulty with this concept because he doesn't like to really see that things are out of order in the Chumash. But in this case, you see it says God blessed, which again in English sounds perfect to us, but in Hebrew, it should have said Vayivarech Hashem, blessed Hashem Abraham with everything. And it mentions Hashem's name first. So if this were to be an example of the Avar Rachok, the distant past, it really would fit in very, very nicely. And we know it would be true. It's that God didn't just bless Abraham now. He didn't like win the lottery or all of a sudden found this great way of making his sheep more fertile and had this bumper crop, whether it be of agricultural crops or of animal crops. It wasn't that he just became wealthy now. If you want to refer to, and even if you're referring to Yitzchak in a way, Yitzchak's 37 years old possibly, and if he's not 37, so whatever, the youngest he is maybe 13. So it still didn't happen right away. He's not a baby. But especially if you look at that bakol as referring to material possessions and other things as well, maybe there's a reason I'm talking about material possessions, is that Abraham had all of that already, but not until he puts it into the context of his son and in building the Jewish people and in furthering the goal of educating the world about Hashem. Only when Abraham sees the future of his son continuing, that's when he appreciates all the blessings that he has. Without this, all the blessings that he's had for such a long time now would not be as valuable to him. Now, the Rashbam has a very different approach to the question. The Rashbam says that the Torah, he's really answering the Gur Aryeh's question of why do we need to know about Abraham's possessions. The Rashbam is taking the approach that it's not only about Abraham's son. It is and it isn't. The Rashbam says, don't think that Abraham had to send Eliezer to go all the way back up north to Abraham's homeland to find a shidduch because nobody wanted to marry him. Don't think he was like the poor man on the block or even the strange person on the block. And because of that, people stayed away from him. No, not at all. Abraham was, family was very desirous to people, and the Rashbam focuses because of his wealth. Some people like to marry into wealthy families. So there was a line of families that would have loved to have their daughter marry Yitzchak. Maybe there were other people who would have wanted the same. According to the Medrash, Eliezer wanted his daughter to be able to marry Yitzchak, but other people not as close even to Abraham as Eliezer was, that would have wanted it because of what Abraham represented in the world, his justice, his views of God. I mean, the Rashbam doesn't talk about that. He talks about it more in terms of the material possessions, is that that Abraham could have identified many people locally who would have liked to have married Yitzchak. There was, he was popular, but he didn't want that. And so don't think that it was because Abraham and Yitzchak were being rejected that the Kala had to come from up north. It happened because that was Abraham's choice, which shortly we'll talk about. I'm trying to think about how much of the questions that we answered. One of the questions that I want to definitely answer, because the Siftei Chachamim helps us to answer that. The Siftei Chachamim says that the reason that Abraham's name is repeated a second time in the pasuk is because of the fact that God made it clear to Abraham that when he was Avram, he was not going to have the child, but as Abraham, he would have children. So it was, Siftei Chachamim says the word, instead of a pronoun association with the verb of being blessed, Abraham's name was repeated again to underscore that also was the part of the bracha of Abraham as Abraham with his changed status and changed name. You know, as we talk about, especially the Rashbam and what's on Abraham's mind, it reminds us of how our material resources should obviously be used for very, very meaningful purposes, and to help make the world better, help make people better. You know, what takes place as the chapter continues, after we had that one pasuk, we were discussing the introductory pasuk, but now we get into the story, and the we could have understood the story without the introduction, but the introduction tells us more about what's going on in Abraham's mind, putting a lot of factors together, and then he summons his servant, the elder of his household, the one who controlled all of the possessions, the CEO and the financial officer, which is, he's not identified by name, but that, and he requires Eliezer to take an oath to fulfill the mission that Abraham is about to give to him, and that is going to his homeland and finding a bride for Yitzchak. You know, the Malbim asked the question, and I'll give you a chance to answer it. Why didn't Abraham just send Yitzchak? Why you send Eliezer? Please unmute yourselves if you'd like to give an answer. You know,
Sorry.
Yeah,
Obviously.
I want to say that I know that everybody who's online are people with good thoughts and a history of sharing thoughts in a very appropriate, fashion. So I won't be daunted if I have to wait a little bit longer to have you contribute. But yes, Cheryl.
Okay,
Cheryl and then Honey.
I guess because if Yitzhak goes himself, then everybody will know that, oh, he's a good chap, and he's like the best guy, and he's good looking, and he's got money, and he's got all good yichus and everything, and so then everybody will go for those things. But at least if you send Eliezer, nobody will really know what's he coming for, what's he trying to do, and what's his point. Because I mean, like that's why he had this plan of like, waiting for his camels to be given water and all this stuff. So nobody would really know what Eliezer was looking for. Whereas Yitzhak, maybe everybody would straight away know, what is he looking for? He's looking for a wife. He's coming, let's see who we can line up for him.
Okay, maybe, but now we can get phones with 5G and everything in it, but back then the pixels weren't so great, and people didn't really know what Yitzhak looked like. Eliezer could have said he was Yitzhak. Nobody would have known the difference.
Okay.
But you have merit to what you're saying. But I do want to couch it still that Eliezer arrives as a pretty wealthy fellow, 10 camels, and with so nishlecht, as they say in Yiddish. But there's some merit to what you say. Yes, honey.
Maybe because he was supposed to be a sacrifice that shouldn't leave the land of Israel. The land was birthed.
Well, that's a very practical answer. He never did leave the land of Israel, so that is a great answer. It's interesting why the Malbim didn't even give that answer. That's a great answer. So that's like there's no arguing with that. That's like a black and white answer, and that's great. Is that I'm just jotting myself a note. But what the Malbim says himself, interestingly, is that basically, like, sometimes you need somebody else to give you some guidance and advice, and that Eliezer was particularly well positioned for that, and was very, very well respected as having a real good handle on things and being a good manager. We'll see if we have time to talk about the shidduch conversations, but I only mention that right now because sometimes when it comes to shidduchim, sometimes it's good not to listen to somebody else. Sometimes people dismiss a potential relationship when somebody asks them, "Oh, what do you think? So and so. What do you think?" And the other person sort of puts it down. So, maybe sometimes that's good advice, and maybe sometimes it's not. So, but at least the Malbim says that here on this mission, that Eliezer was a great candidate to actually being marching ahead and try to identify that column. But I think maybe for the last topic in this episode will be the following. When Avraham, if you have a chumash, so we're going to look at the Pasuk Gimel, the third verse in chapter 24. Again, verse number 1 told us, what the mindset of Avraham. He's getting older. He still has his bachelor son. And it's not just any son. He's destined to be Abraham's successor in the missions in the world. And then we read that Abraham takes action on his thoughts, summons Eliezer, and gives him the mission. And he says, Pasuk 3, Va'ashbiacha b'Hashem Elokei Hashemayim. I'm going to make you take an oath in the name of God of the heavens, the Elokei haaretz, and gods of the land. And what should come next? What should he say next? If you have the Chumash, don't even look in the Chumash. What should come next? What should he say after that? Please unmute and share. Can I tell you a quick story while you think? Barbara grew up in Ventnor, New Jersey. It's outside of Atlantic City. Ventnor, and I see a hand raised. Okay, we'll get you on the list. I'm going to tell you the story anyway. And after several years of my being in the family, we started to go to shul in a man's house. Jack and Miriam Traki were very prominent members of the community. I think every single worthwhile Jewish endeavor in that greater area, had some significant financial backing from Jack Traki, a very giving person. And he built a wing in his house. It wasn't huge, but he had a wing in his house that was a dedicated shul, like his father had back in Vilna. And when I would visit, especially in several of the many early years of our marriage, we would spend a month in the summer down visiting with my in-laws. My father-in-law's yahrzeit was yesterday, and a few other times, during the year. It could be Thanksgiving, it could be Pesach, whatever. And on Shabbos, very often, I was asked to give a shiur. The official rabbi, but that wasn't his professional job of that minyan, was Rabbi Mordechai Weiss, the brother of Rabbi Avi Weiss. Rabbi Mordechai Weiss was the longtime principal of the Hebrew Academy in Margate. And so he was very happy to, I was in the pulpit and I really wanted to hear other people talk, but for Rabbi Weiss's sake, so I would share some Torah. And one week, it actually was a week that Daniel Kurtzer, who was already, in government, in the Defense Department, his mother-in-law had a place nearby as well, and so he would come down. We didn't overlap too often, but one particular Shabbos we were there, and Mr. Traki asked me to speak, and I probably was already there for a couple of weeks, and I said, well, Dan Kurtzer is here this week. Let him speak, and he won. Whatever. In the end, I think maybe we both spoke, and when I got up to speak, Jack Traki said, "Now Rabbi Yasgur is going to give us, a shiur." And he says he didn't really want to give, and I don't know why he was hesitating so much, because all he does is ask us questions and we do all the work. So I'm trying to ask you questions, but you're making me work too hard. So help me out. Yeah, Cheryl, if you remember the questions.
I was just giving you thumbs up for the story.
Ah, okay. So what should come next? Abraham says, I'm going to give you an oath. What should the oath say? What's the mission? You would think that he'd say, I want you to find an appropriate wife for my son Yitzchak. But he doesn't express it that way. He says, I want you to take an oath. The oath is, do not take a local girl. Do not take one of the Canaanite women to be my son's wife. And I'm going to add the words, maybe even though, those are the added words. And Abraham says, I'm living in their midst. I didn't really focus on that phrase so much, but Abraham knows that's his neighborhood and everything, but he doesn't want the wife coming from there. And then Eliezer is starting to get worried. What if he's not successful? And he says to Abraham, what would happen? This is in Pasuk Chayei 5. What would happen if I find like a good candidate, but she doesn't want to move? She likes where she's living. And Cheryl pointed out, he didn't even bring the chassan for me to look at. Why should I make the trip and leave my family and everything without it? So Eliezer's worried about that. So and he says, so is it then, can I bring Yitzchak? Can I bring your son to where she is, to your land where you came from? And Abraham's next statement is, Hishamer lecha, be careful. Pen tashiva b'nishama, lest you bring my son back to that area, meaning, back, because I came from there. Yitzchak was never there. And Abraham goes on and he says, I have trust in Hashem that things will work out. So he never says to Eliezer, really, except at the very end of this part, like the end of Pasuk Zion 7, there he says, he says, when he says to Abraham, you have to listen to what I'm saying, that you can't take somebody locally, the woman, it really has to come back. If she doesn't come back, you're going to be free from this oath, because that's a condition that you can't fulfill if she refuses. But I want you to go there, and with Hashem's help, only at the end, he says that for my son. You know what Abraham never says? He never says to Eliezer what Abraham would like to see for Yitzchak's wife. He just told him, not a local girl, go to my homeland, do your best to get her to come back. He doesn't establish the criteria for whom would be a good shidduch.
Well, don't the negatives establish some criteria? By saying not this, not that, you're still establishing some minor criteria.
No, come on, that's,
Like you tell your child, you're not marrying someone who's not Jewish, you're not marrying someone who's not
exactly. But there are a lot of different type of people who are not Jewish. Even there are a lot of different type of people who are Jewish, and it is an important thing, but it doesn't tell us about someone being, more discerning about what qualities would
good midot, okay.
you would want to see, right? So Abraham seems not to talk about that. It's Eliezer who makes that decision, and I don't know if I should tell you some of my thinking or let you think about it over Shabbos, but I guess I will. You could still think about it over Shabbos, and then you could let me know, what you think. Is that, the Siftei Chachamim, that one of the main commentaries on Rashi, from a selection that I read to you, I didn't read you his whole selection. One second, was it the Siftei Chachamim? Maybe, okay, I'm not finding the source right now, but from one of the sources, basically, it said that Abraham felt that there were certain qualities that were ingrained in the Canaanite people that he definitely did not want for his son. And that, and as much as there may have been idol worshiping back in his old neighborhood, there obviously were some things. Look at himself, who came out, and Sarah, who came out, that there were aspects that were very laudatory and could be developed, when under the right influence and community. So that, to me, it seems that Abraham focused on, let's say, previous influences, i.e. genetics, that there may be certain predispositions that people are inheriting, and the future influences of a positive environment. That Abraham was confident that I'm not saying you could just pick anybody, but that Abraham was confident that somebody who was going, let's say, to leave her parents' home, that was a major thing, being willing to leave her parents' home and move far away, and the trip was not an easy trip. They weren't going to go visit, for Sunday lunch or brunch. But so he felt that once that Kala would be brought back to Abraham and Yitzchak's household, that the type of woman who would leave could be influenced to develop the the right midot. But Eliezer was like more tachlis. He knew what he admired in Abraham. He knew what Abraham demonstrated as being important, and so that Eliezer decides to create this test to narrow down the candidates. And obviously God helped him a lot because it was the first one that he encountered. But so that might be like a different world outlook. And I'll ask myself even a question of what I'm about to say, but Abraham and Sarah did succeed in making students and influencing converts. But still, he might have felt that for a woman who's going to become one of the imahot, one of the foremothers of one of the matriarchs of the Jewish people, that she had to have more going for her than people who still would have been brought up in Canaan. So Abraham understood the power of education and the right environment, but wanted the building blocks to come from outside and without having that local family, just like God told him that he had to leave his homeland and be willing to reestablish himself in a new place. That's what Abraham wanted for his daughter-in-law, the next matriarch of the Jewish people, and part of the partnership that would, again, influence their surroundings. So those are some thoughts on this Shidduch episode. I may share more thoughts Shabbos afternoon if you want to come. A lot to say over here. Any final remarks or questions?
A quick question. If we were to compare the sending of the Eved, as you described it, to, let's say, the situation when Yaakov went back to the homeland, so to speak. Here he goes back and he's had to escape what was happening in his native home. He's alone. He's without anything that shows his wealth, his status. Whereas Elimelech comes and, like you said, has these camels, is able to define the family and things like that. Is that parallel situation? Is that an inappropriate comparison?
Is it a comparison or a contrast?
Well, it certainly is a contrast, okay? But what does that say if we compare, as I say, or contrast the situation in one situation, okay, versus a second situation where it's still someone who ultimately finds a wife, marries, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if you have any comments on that comparison or that contrast.
Okay. Just, I think my initial comments, and maybe we can continue this discussion, but my initial comments would be like, as you point out, certainly Yaakov knew that the circumstances weren't the same. Yitzchak may not have appreciated it. And as Rivka convinced Yitzchak that Yaakov should also find a wife from the homeland, and didn't reveal to Yitzchak that Yaakov's life would be threatened if he remained in Canaan. So in Yitzchak's mind, he accepted the fact that it's that it's good to look for the shidduch back from up north in the greater Haran area. and was willing for Yaakov, who really had no choice but to get out. But in Yitzhak's mind, he was willing for Yaakov to go and not to appoint somebody else to be the representative to fulfill the mission. Now, why? It could be, as mentioned before, about himself, and he was not to leave Eretz Yisrael, but had been deployed to Yaakov. It could be that they didn't have somebody as qualified as Eliezer to take the mission. It could be that Yaakov was even older than Yitzchak was when he got married. So maybe those are all things that fed in, and his wife is advising him that this is the right thing to do. The people who arrive in a very different manner. Eliezer arrives really in a regal manner, and Yaakov arrives as a refugee.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of contrast over there as well. But there is symbolism of finding your wife by the well, in Yaakov's case, he had to make his own decisions about who he felt would be a good shidduch for him. So I guess that's another model. We have two different models for how to find
That's
the
the
right
point, Rabbi.
shidduch.
There's different
Yeah.
models of meeting your basher.
Right. It's very important. I don't know if you would want to, if you have to say. I mean, the Orach Chaim has a tremendous insight on the shidduch process based from this encounter, but I can't go into it now. But sometime between now and the future, we'll take a look at it. Thanks for joining. Have
Thank
a
you,
wonderful
Rabbi.
day.
Bye.
A
Have a
beautiful
good
Shabbos.
day. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.